On the night of their 15th anniversary, Rachel sat across from her husband, Stephen, watching him swirl his wine like a man rehearsing a confession. He didn't look at her, not once, not until he finally exhaled and said the words that shattered the evening. "You've disgusted me since day one, and tonight I'm ending this marriage." The entire restaurant froze. A nearby couple paused mid-bite. A waiter stopped pouring water. Everyone expected Rachel to break, to cry, to fall apart. Instead, she smiled, not a confused smile, not a broken one, a smile that carried the weight of a secret she'd been waiting 15 years to reveal. Stephen thought he came to end everything, but tonight, Rachel would be the one who finished him. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. But how does a marriage reach the point where a husband calmly destroys a woman's heart over dinner? What drove him to say those words? Why did Rachel smile instead of cry? And what truth was she holding? A truth powerful enough to turn this anniversary into a reckoning. To understand that moment, we must return to where the story began, long before the restaurant, long before the betrayal, before the smile, back to the secrets no one saw. Rachel was the kind of woman people described as capable. A nurse by profession, she'd built a life around helping others, around believing in second chances, around giving people the benefit of the doubt. She grew up believing in partnership, in building a marriage brick by brick, with patience and trust. Stephen was different. When they met at a charity fundraiser 12 years before that fateful anniversary dinner, he had everything: ambition in his eyes, a sharp suit, confidence that filled the room. He was a financial consultant, the kind of man who spoke about portfolios and investments like poetry. He swept her off her feet with dinner dates at expensive restaurants, weekend getaways to wine country, and promises of a future where money would never be a worry. But charm, as Rachel would learn, can be a carefully constructed mask. The first cracks appeared in year 3 of their marriage. Small things, she told herself, were just the natural ebb and flow of married life. He stopped asking about her day. He spent more nights working late at the office. He forgot their anniversary one year, brushed it off with an expensive bracelet delivered by courier the next day. No card, no explanation. By year 7, Rachel was doing most of the emotional labor in their marriage. Remembering birthdays, planning holidays, keeping the house running, making sure they still had date nights even when Stephen seemed distracted. By year 10, she felt like a guest in her own marriage, welcomed but not truly seen. Then came the moment that changed everything. It started with something small, a credit card statement that arrived at the house instead of going to his office like usual. Rachel opened it out of habit, thinking it was their joint account. It wasn't. The balance made her hands go cold. $73,000. Charges at hotels she'd never stayed in. Restaurants in cities Stephen had never mentioned visiting. Wire transfers to accounts she didn't recognize. When she confronted him that evening, Stephen had an explanation ready. It was for work, he said. Client entertainment, business expenses that would be reimbursed. He even showed her emails, official-looking documents that seemed to back up his story. Rachel wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. So she did, for a while. But 3 months later, she found another statement. This one was worse. A personal loan, taken out in both their names, that she'd never signed for. $85,000, borrowed against their home. When she asked Stephen about it, he grew defensive, angry even. He accused her of not trusting him, of trying to control him, of being paranoid. He told her the loan was an investment opportunity, a sure thing that would triple their money within a year. He made her feel guilty for questioning him. So again, she let it go. She wanted peace more than she wanted answers. But Rachel wasn't naive. She was observant. And over the next 18 months, she started paying attention to the details Stephen thought she would ignore. Late-night phone calls he took in another room, deleted text messages, business trips that didn't match the receipts she occasionally found in his jacket pockets, withdrawals from their savings account that he explained away as emergency expenses or investment opportunities. Rachel didn't confront him again. She'd learned that confrontation led nowhere except to more lies, more manipulation, more gaslighting. Instead, she did something Stephen never expected. She started documenting everything, every suspicious charge, every unexplained absence, every inconsistency in his stories. She opened her own bank account, one Stephen didn't know about, and started setting aside money from her nursing shifts. Then, 8 months before their 15th anniversary, Rachel made a phone call that would change everything. She hired a private investigator. The investigator's name was Catherine, a former police detective who specialized in financial fraud and marital infidelity. For 6 months, Catherine followed the money trail Stephen had left behind. What she found was worse than Rachel had imagined. Stephen wasn't just hiding money, he was running a con. He'd been taking out loans and credit cards in both their names for years, using Rachel's excellent credit score without her knowledge. He'd forged her signature on documents. He'd created shell companies that existed only on paper. He'd borrowed from friends and family members, telling them elaborate stories about investments that never existed. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the woman. Her name was Vanessa. She wasn't a random affair, some co-worker Stephen had gotten too close to. Vanessa was a professional, a con artist who'd targeted Stephen deliberately, who'd seduced him not for love but for access. Access to information about his clients, about his finances, about his vulnerabilities. And Stephen, blinded by ego and desire, had given her everything. The private investigator discovered that Vanessa was feeding information to Stephen's business competitors, client lists, investment strategies, confidential financial data. She was also systematically draining the accounts Stephen had opened in secret, the ones he thought he was hiding from Rachel. He wasn't hiding money from his wife to leave her. He was losing money to a woman who was playing him, and he didn't even know it. For months, Rachel sat with this information, wrestling with what to do. Part of her wanted to confront Stephen immediately, to throw the evidence in his face and watch him crumble. But another part of her, the strategic part, knew that would give him time to cover his tracks, to spin new lies, to find a way to make himself the victim. So Rachel waited. She gathered more evidence. She consulted with a divorce attorney. She moved money to safety. She prepared herself emotionally for what was coming, and she chose the perfect day to reveal everything. Their 15th anniversary. The restaurant was Stephen's choice, an upscale steakhouse downtown, where he'd proposed to her 15 years earlier. Rachel found that detail particularly fitting. He'd started their marriage in this place with promises. Now she would end it here with truth. Stephen had seemed distracted all evening, barely touching his food, checking his phone obsessively. Rachel knew why. Vanessa had been texting him all day. Messages the private investigator had already forwarded to Rachel's phone. Vanessa was getting impatient. The money was drying up. Stephen was becoming a liability. She was preparing to disappear, and Stephen could feel it happening but couldn't admit it to himself. Finally, after the waiter cleared their entree plates, Stephen set down his wine glass and looked at Rachel with an expression she'd never seen before. Cold, almost hateful. That's when he said it. "You've disgusted me since day one, and tonight, I'm ending this marriage." Rachel felt the words hit her chest like physical blows. Around them, other diners had stopped eating, stopped talking. Everyone was watching. Stephen continued, his voice growing louder, more confident. "There's someone else. Someone who actually understands me. Someone who doesn't make me feel suffocated every single day." He leaned forward, his eyes hard. "I should have left you years ago." The silence in the restaurant was deafening. A woman at the next table had her hand over her mouth. A man near the window shook his head slowly. Everyone expected Rachel to cry, to beg, to make a scene. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. Her hands were steady. Her voice was calm. "I know," she said simply. Stephen blinked, confusion flickering across his face. "You know what? About the affair," Rachel said. "I've known for 11 months. The color drained from Stephen's face. He tried to recover, forcing a bitter laugh. "Then you should understand why this marriage is over." Rachel slid the envelope across the table. "Actually, this marriage is over because of what I discovered. And Stephen, you're going to want to open that." He stared at the envelope like it might explode. Slowly, he picked it up and pulled out the contents. Photographs, bank statements, phone records, hotel receipts, legal documents. His hands started to tremble. There were pictures of him and Vanessa together at restaurants, at hotels, getting into her car. But that wasn't what made his face go white. It was the second set of documents. Wire transfer records showing money moving from Stephen's accounts into Vanessa's, then from Vanessa's account to another account, an account belonging to Richard Crane, Stephen's biggest business competitor. Rachel watched his expression change from confusion to horror to disbelief. When he looked up at her, his confidence had shattered. "I don't understand," he whispered. "You don't understand," Rachel said, her voice still perfectly calm, "that the woman you've been sleeping with isn't your lover. She's a corporate spy, and you gave her everything." Stephen's eyes darted back to the documents. Rachel continued, "For the past 18 months, Vanessa has been feeding your client information, your business strategies, your financial data directly to Richard Crane. You wondered why you kept losing major accounts, why clients suddenly dropped you for no reason, why your investment recommendations kept failing. This is why. She was sabotaging you from the inside, and you were so blinded by whatever you thought you had with her that you never saw it." Stephen was shaking now, flipping through page after page of evidence. There were text messages between Vanessa and Richard Crane, discussing Stephen like he was a mark, a target, someone to be used and discarded. There were emails planning how to extract more information from him. There were financial records showing that over $80,000 had moved from Stephen's secret accounts into Vanessa's, and then straight through to Richard Crane's business accounts. Rachel let him absorb it all before she pulled out the second envelope. This one she set down carefully between them. "That's not all, Stephen. Page 12. He turned to page 12 with hands that could barely hold the paper steady. It was a forensic accounting report. Every loan he'd taken out in both their names, every credit card he'd opened with forged signatures, every penny he'd borrowed from friends and family members using fabricated investment opportunities. The total debt was staggering, $437,000. All of it tied to Stephen's schemes, his secrets, his lies. But there was something else in the report that made Stephen stop breathing. The forensic accountant had traced where some of that money went. He'd been paying Vanessa for months, thousands of dollars at a time, thinking he was helping her with rent, with car payments, with her sick mother who didn't exist. Every dollar he gave her went straight to Richard Crane. Stephen wasn't having an affair. He was being extorted, blackmailed, used. Rachel leaned forward, her voice quiet but sharp as broken glass. "You weren't the predator in this story, Stephen. You were the prey, and you were too arrogant to see it." Around them, the restaurant was completely silent. Every person in the room was frozen, watching this private devastation unfold. Stephen tried to speak, to defend himself, but no words came out. Finally, he managed, "Rachel, this can't be real. Vanessa loves me." "She wouldn't." "She doesn't love you," Rachel interrupted. "She never did. She targeted you specifically. Did you ever wonder how you met her? At that conference in Denver 2 years ago?" Stephen's eyes widened. He remembered. A financial conference. Vanessa had approached him at the hotel bar, asked him about his presentation, laughed at his jokes. It had felt like fate. Rachel pulled out another document. Emails between Richard Crane and a recruitment firm that specialized in corporate espionage. There was Vanessa's name, with a contract. $10,000 up front, plus 20% of any financial intelligence she could extract from the target. Stephen Lawson. "You were a job, Stephen," Rachel said. "A paycheck, and you destroyed our marriage for it." Stephen's hands were shaking so badly now that he dropped the papers. They scattered across the table, evidence of his complete and utter humiliation spread out for the entire restaurant to see. But Rachel wasn't done. She pulled out one more document. This one she placed directly in front of him. It was a divorce petition, already filed, already served. "This was delivered to your office 3 days ago," Rachel said. "Your assistant signed for it. I'm guessing you never opened it." Stephen stared at the document, like it was written in a language he didn't understand. "The house is in my name," Rachel continued, her voice steady and factual. "I bought it before we married, if you remember. Your name was never on the deed. The car you drive, my father co-signed for it, so that's being repossessed. Your credit is destroyed, Stephen. Your business is about to collapse. Your competitors have everything they need to bury you. And your friends and family, the ones you borrowed money from, they're going to want answers." She stood up slowly, gathering her purse, leaving all the evidence scattered on the table. "But that's not even the worst part," Rachel said, looking down at him one final time. The worst part is that every single person in your life is going to know that you threw away a 15-year marriage for a woman who was conning you, that you were too stupid, too arrogant, too selfish to see what was right in front of you. Stephen finally found his voice. Rachel, please, we can fix this. We can talk. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know what she was doing. Rachel's smile was sad and tired. I begged you to talk to me for 10 years, Stephen. I begged you to let me in, to be honest with me, to treat me like a partner. You chose lies every single time. So no, we're not going to talk. We're not going to fix this. We're done. She picked up her coat and started toward the door. Stephen scrambled to his feet, knocking over his wineglass. Red wine spread across the white tablecloth like blood. Where are you going? He called after her, his voice breaking. Rachel paused at the door and turned back one last time. The entire restaurant was still watching, dozens of strangers bearing witness to the end of a marriage. I'm going home, Rachel said simply, to my house, where you will not be welcome. Your belongings are already boxed and in storage. The address is in the divorce papers. Don't contact me. Don't come to my workplace. Don't try to fix this. It's over. And then she walked out into the night, leaving Stephen standing alone in a restaurant full of strangers, surrounded by the wreckage of his own choices. If this story has your heart racing, comment, I'm still watching. Let's see who's truly here till the end. For Stephen, the weeks that followed were a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. Vanessa had disappeared completely. Her phone number was disconnected. Her apartment was empty, cleared out overnight. Her social media accounts vanished. She'd never existed, not really. She'd been a ghost, a con, a perfectly constructed illusion designed to destroy him. And it had worked. His business collapsed within a month. Clients who'd been with him for years dropped him without explanation. The few who stayed demanded answers he couldn't give. How could he tell them that their confidential information had been sold to competitors? How could he admit what he'd done? His partners at the financial consulting firm forced him out, threatening legal action if he didn't leave quietly. The loans started coming due. Friends and family members he'd borrowed money from started asking questions, demanding repayment. Some threatened legal action. His parents wouldn't return his calls. But the worst part was the isolation. Rachel had been his foundation, his constant, the one person who'd stood by him through everything. And he'd thrown her away like garbage, told her she disgusted him, publicly humiliated her on what should have been a celebration of their marriage. Now, alone in a cheap apartment he could barely afford, Stephen replayed that restaurant scene over and over in his mind. He remembered the look in Rachel's eyes when he'd said those terrible words. He'd expected to see heartbreak. Instead, he'd seen pity. She'd known everything. She'd known about Vanessa, about the con, about his stupidity. She'd sat across from him and let him destroy himself, let him reveal exactly who he'd become, and she'd done it with grace, with dignity, with a calm strength that made his cruelty look even more pathetic. 6 weeks after the anniversary dinner, Stephen's phone rang with an unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. It was Richard Crane, his business rival, the man who'd orchestrated his destruction. I wanted to thank you personally, Richard said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. You made it so easy. Every piece of information, every client detail, every strategy, you just handed it all over because you thought a pretty girl was in love with you. Stephen's stomach turned. Why are you calling me? To make sure you understand, Richard said. This wasn't personal. It was just business. You had market share I wanted, clients I needed, and you were vulnerable. Vanessa was an investment that paid off better than I could have imagined. She wasn't even real, Stephen whispered. Oh, Vanessa's real, Richard laughed. She's just not who you thought she was. She's a contractor, works for the highest bidder. And you, Stephen, you were the easiest mark she's ever had. She told me you actually thought you were in love, that you were planning to leave your wife for her. That's dedication to the role, I'll give her that. The call ended, leaving Stephen staring at his phone in the dark. He'd lost everything, his marriage, his business, his reputation, his money, his pride, all of it gone because he'd believed a lie, because he'd chosen ego over truth, because he'd taken for granted the one person who'd actually loved him. He thought about calling Rachel, about begging for forgiveness, about trying to explain. But what could he say? That he was sorry? That he didn't know? That he'd made a mistake? None of it would be enough. None of it would undo what he'd done. So, Stephen sat in the darkness of his empty apartment and finally, after years of running from the truth, he faced what he'd become. A man who'd destroyed his own life. A man who'd chosen lies over love, ambition over integrity, ego over everything. A man who'd had everything and thrown it away for nothing. Rachel rebuilt her life slowly and deliberately. She threw herself into her work at the hospital, picking up extra shifts, finding purpose in helping others. She reconnected with friends she'd neglected during her marriage, went to book clubs and hiking groups, remembered what it felt like to laugh without wondering what mood Stephen would be in when she got home. The divorce was finalized 3 months after that anniversary dinner. Stephen didn't contest it. He couldn't. The evidence of his financial fraud, his affair, his lies, it was all too damaging. His attorney advised him to sign everything Rachel wanted and hope she didn't press charges for the forged signatures and identity theft. Rachel could have destroyed him legally. She could have filed criminal charges, pursued restitution, made sure he paid for every lie he'd told and every document he'd forged. But she didn't. Not because she'd forgiven him, but because she'd realized something important in the months since that dinner. Stephen had already destroyed himself. She didn't need to add to it. 6 months after the divorce, Rachel was leaving the hospital after a long shift when she saw him. Stephen was standing in the parking lot, thinner than she remembered, wearing clothes that looked slept in. He looked broken. "I'm not here to bother you," he said quickly, seeing her expression. "I just needed to say something. I've been in therapy, trying to understand how I became the person I was, and I realized I never actually apologized." "Not really." Rachel stopped but didn't move closer. "An apology doesn't change anything, Stephen." "I know," he said, his voice cracking. "I know it doesn't, but I need you to hear it anyway. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the lies, for the betrayal, for the cruelty. I'm sorry for wasting 15 years of your life. I'm sorry for not seeing how incredible you were when I had the chance. You deserved so much better than what I gave you." Rachel looked at him for a long moment. She felt nothing, not anger, not sadness, not even pity, just a quiet sense of distance, like looking at a stranger who vaguely resembled someone she used to know. "You're right," she said finally. "I did deserve better, and now I have the chance to find it." She walked past him toward her car, not looking back. She heard him say one more thing, barely a whisper. "I hope you do. I hope you find someone who deserves you." Rachel got in her car and drove away, watching Stephen disappear in her rearview mirror. And for the first time in years, she felt truly free. Free from the lies, from the manipulation, from the constant anxiety of wondering what he was hiding. Free to be herself, to trust herself, to build a life based on truth instead of secrets. A year later, Rachel met someone new. His name was James, a teacher at her niece's school. He was kind, thoughtful, and most importantly, he was honest. Their first date lasted 4 hours because they couldn't stop talking. Their second date turned into a weekend adventure. Their third date ended with James looking at her seriously and saying, "I need you to know something. I don't do games. I don't do secrets. If we're going to do this, I need it to be real, all of it." Rachel had smiled and taken his hand. "That's all I've ever wanted." She didn't tell James about Stephen right away, about the betrayal and the con and the terrible anniversary dinner. That story came later, when they'd built enough trust for her to share it without fear. And when she finally did tell him, James had listened quietly, his hand never leaving hers. When she finished, he'd said simply, "I'm sorry that happened to you, and I'm grateful he was stupid enough to lose you, because now I get the chance he didn't deserve." They were married on a beach 2 years later, a small ceremony with close friends and family. No secrets, no lies, just love, built on a foundation of truth and respect. Rachel thought about Stephen sometimes, wondered if he'd ever actually changed, if therapy had helped him understand what he'd lost. But mostly, she didn't think about him at all. He was a chapter in her life that was closed, a painful lesson learned, a reminder that she was stronger than she'd ever imagined. If you were in Rachel's shoes, what would you have done at that restaurant table? Would you have confronted Stephen the moment you found out about the affair? Or would you have waited, gathered evidence, and planned your exit like Rachel did? Is there ever a right way to handle betrayal of this magnitude? And here's the harder question. Do you think Stephen truly understood what he lost? Can someone who lied and manipulated for years actually change? Or was his apology in that parking lot just another performance? Think about the people in your own life. How well do you really know them? How much do you trust the stories they tell you? Rachel trusted Stephen for 15 years, believed his explanations, gave him chance after chance, and in the end, almost everything he told her was a lie. How do you protect yourself from that kind of betrayal without closing yourself off completely? How do you stay open to love and trust while also staying aware of the warning signs? These are questions worth asking yourself, because the truth is, Stephen's story isn't unique. Every day, people discover that their partners have been lying, cheating, stealing, hiding major parts of their lives. The details change, but the pain is the same. And here's what's important to remember from Rachel's story. She didn't just survive the betrayal. She refused to let it define her. She took control, gathered information, made plans, and walked away on her own terms. She could have stayed, could have tried to fix a marriage that was built on lies, but she chose herself instead. She chose truth, dignity, freedom. That takes courage, real, bone-deep courage, the kind that doesn't come naturally but has to be chosen every single day. So if this story resonates with you, if you've experienced betrayal or you know someone who has, remember Rachel's smile in that restaurant. Remember how she sat across from Stephen, knowing everything, and refused to give him the satisfaction of watching her break. She took her power back, and in the end, that's what saved her. Not revenge, not anger, just the quiet, fierce decision to value herself more than she valued a marriage that had stopped serving her years ago. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you loved because staying would have destroyed you? How did you find the strength to do it? And if you haven't had to make that choice, what would you do if you found yourself in Rachel's situation? Let's talk about it. Because these conversations matter. They help us understand ourselves, support each other, and maybe recognize the warning signs before it's too late. Rachel's story is a reminder that not every loss is a tragedy. Sometimes, losing something that was hurting you is the greatest gift you can give yourself. Sometimes the person you thought you couldn't live without is exactly the person you need to leave behind to truly start living. Stephen learned that lesson the hard way, by losing the one person who'd actually loved him for who he was, not what he could give her. He traded real love for an illusion and ended up with nothing. Rachel learned a different lesson, that her strength didn't come from her marriage or her husband's approval. It came from within, from her ability to see the truth and act on it, even when it hurt. Both lessons are important. Both are worth remembering. If this story made you think, made you feel, made you look at your own life a little differently, hit that like button. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that explore the complicated, messy, beautiful reality of human relationships. And most importantly, check on yourself. Check on your relationships. Make sure you're building your life on truth, not on secrets and lies that will eventually collapse. Because in the end, the truth always comes out. Always. The only question is whether you'll be the one revealing it or the one trying to hide from it. Choose wisely. We'll see you in the next story.